President Gerald Ford was born on July 14, 1913 in Omaha, Nebraska. He was originally named after his father, Leslie Lynch King, but after a nasty divorce between his parents, he changed his name to Gerald Ford after his stepfather. President Gerald Ford was intelligent and athletic, but after two great falls on national television, he was known as a klutz. Gerald Ford graduated top of his law class at Yale and then served in the Navy during World War II in 1942. In 1947, Ford met his future wife, who had a drinking problem but received help and created the Betty Ford Clinic. Then, in 1948, he was elected in the House of Representatives. He was a sworn member of the 81st Congress. He was assigned to the Public Works Committee. After 12 terms in Congress, he was elected vice president in 1973 alongside President Richard Nixon. In 1947, President Nixon resigned instead of being impeached due to the Watergate scandal, therefore making Gerald Ford our 38th president.
When Gerald Ford came into office, there were already some recent treaties with other countries due to Nixon, most notably the SALT treaties with the USSR. Over the course of his administration, Ford wanted a détente with Russia and a treaty better than SALT. Unfortunately, neither could be achieved, though, because the USSR and America had major disagreements on safe ICBM ranges. Ford saw the ICBMs as a danger to America and wanted to avoid them at all costs. In the Middle East, Ford helped create a peace settlement between countries that have been at war for God knows how long. It all started in spring 1975, where he held a meeting between the leaders of Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Syria, and other high-ranking officials from other countries. There, they all worked out a treaty that was supposed to settle their differences and maintain peace. Regarding China, Ford wanted to rekindle the bad blood that was created between China and the U.S. after it was lost to communism. Ford saw China as uber important to the U.S. because it was vital to create a stable relationship with the country since it was by far the most populous nation on the entire planet. So in December 1975, Ford actually visited China and had meetings with China's leaders, assuring them that their new relationship will last and it is extremely important to the United States. As it was the Cold War, the USSR and the US weren't too fond of each other. Ford avoided any conflict with the Soviets during his presidency, except for a proxy war in Angola. Shortly before Angola achieved independence from Portugal in 1975, there were three political parties trying to gain superiority in government. This led to the breakout of a civil war. The US, China, and USSR were providing financial and military support. But the problem was that they were doing this for separate parties that were all fighting each other. Thankfully, before anything could escalate, Angola got independence, and shortly after, the fighting stopped. President Ford was big on world peace. Throughout his presidency, one of his big goals was to reach out to all areas of the globe to make allies and to minimize the United States' chances of becoming involved in any wars in the future. In 1976, Ford was talking about his policy of peace through strength in an interview, stating, quote, "The United States will meet with superpowers, the Soviet Union and with China and others, and seek to relax tensions so that we can continue a policy of peace through strength," end quote. Ford was convinced that if the United States defense was second to none, then nobody would want to mess with us. As a result of this, he proposed an increase of $7.4 billion for the defense budget starting in 1977. All of this was an effort to keep the world a happy place and to stop all conflict.
Mentioned in the beginning of the video, in 1974, Richard Nixon dropped out of presidency due to the Watergate scandal. On June 17, 1972, several burglars were arrested inside the office of the Democratic Committee located in the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. But there was a catch. The burglars were connected to Nixon's re-election campaign, and they were caught attempting to wiretap phones and steal secret documents. Richard Nixon's administration attempted to cover up this political crime by trying to stop the FBI from investigating, destroying evidence, and firing uncooperative staff members. Finally, Richard Nixon resigned from presidency, and Gerald Ford took over his position, therefore also taking over his domestic and foreign policies. This Watergate scandal changed American politics forever, leading many Americans to question their leadership and think more critically about the presidency. When Ford became president, inflation was the nation's #1 domestic enemy. Ford's solution was to initially cut government spending and raise taxes in measures that were in line with Republican policies. In Gerald Ford's first press conference, Ford said, "If we take care of inflation and get our economy back on the road to a healthy future, I think most of our domestic programs or problems will be solved." This is where economics coined the term stagflation to describe this unprecedented situation. During his presidency, America's economy experienced a growth in both unemployment and inflation. In October 1974, President Ford proposed a tax hike and asked for a reduction in federal spending. Ford ended up creating WHIP, Inflation Now, also known as WIN. His WIN plan encouraged the public to conserve energy. He made WIN pins for the public to wear, but unfortunately it had little impact on the nation's economy. In 1975, Ford called for a tax cut of $16 billion to jumpstart the economy, but that included stopping government spending, and the government were not happy about that. For the rest of his term, Ford waged a war with Congress over the appropriate balance between tax cuts and government spending, and in the end, Ford won a small victory when Congress passed the Revenue Adjustment Act of 1975, which was a modest tax cut of $9 billion.